So I wanted to do a little quick demo on how to do essentially like a glowing practical source, a glowing light, and also showing that light bouncing on other surfaces, since a lot of you are going to have some kind of practical in your scene or perhaps some, overhead lighting, whatever. So one of the things that you have to think about when you want that bright white center to, or the light to seem like the brightest, is white is going to be your friend, so the white of the paper, probably, that you're working on. And also that in order to make that feel brighter, you're going to have to darken a lot of everything else. So anything that isn't the light source is going to need to be tinted some kind of value, some kind of color, so that that light feels incredibly bright. I'm also going to try to work mostly in grayscale, at least for the beginning portion of this, so you can kind of see how the value works, and also so that any of you who are working more on that, like getting all your values situated with this like grayscale underpainting, can use it and then just glaze your colors over it. So limited palette here. So this is a little lantern on top of some worn wood boards. We're going to focus on getting the lantern to be brighter. So I'm kind of using my grayscales to prime everything, to prime my values like we talk about a little bit. My grayscales are a warm gray, and I also have a couple cool grays that I'm going to be using for this, because anywhere the light from this lantern is going to be really, really warm, so we're going to prime all those areas with this yellow. But then anywhere else that this light isn't hitting, we want to feel, the opposite, so we're going to use some blue tones and cool grays in particular in those areas. So I drew out the shape of the actual flame here to make sure I keep that bright, bright white. You can already see that I'm using the yellow to also bounce on the edges of the lantern, what we'll catch, and it'll also have this like aura of yellows and oranges and ambers on the ground around it where it's shining. Kind of getting some of those yellows and oranges to blend a little better with my clear blending marker. And now we're going to start deepening our color by using a tangerine. So right now this looks pretty dark because everything around it isn't colored in, but once we get everything else value deepened, this will come off as being really bright and glowy, I promise. On the wood boards, even though I'm adding these colors and light doesn't usually fall in streaks, I'm trying to keep it running in streaks like it's catching on the grain of the wood. So you also want to think about, as the light is glowing around it, how is that light? Like, what specific objects is it going to catch on? What kind of shapes is it going to make? This also has, lanterns have kind of like a starburst effect at the bottom. You can see I'm building on the base of the lamp because they have little holes that go around the outside. So now we're going to work on the boards and sort of getting that value level up so that this seems brighter. This is my darkest cool gray, so I'm using that to do all my darkest shadows. And also knowing that because like the light, the amber, warm, beautiful firelight color doesn't hit here, we want it to feel cold to contrast with the warmth of that light. Now, theoretically, you could do this if you only have grayscale markers. You could do all of this grayscale work and not do the yellow until the end. You could do that with a colored pencil. Because a colored pencil is opaque, it will lay over the markers. There is another demo going up tonight where I could color over grayscale with colored pencil. Hey, yeah, so you can check that out if you wanted to try that technique. So we're still working on darkening, really getting the values tightened up on just this central area. This has the most complex shading on it, of course. The other stuff's going to be more like a flat panel. And I did use a white gel pen to really make sure that that white light is preserved down in the center. I had left it white, but it will help me remember to continue to do that. You can also just draw around it, obviously. So next thing we're going to do is start working more on the boards itself. So we want to darken that cast shadow from the base of the lantern and also make it cold. So it was kind of a warm gray, it was going to blend in, so now we're making it colder. I am glazing over all of my grayscale like we talked about with just a straight wash of this blue. Gives it a little bit of color. You can see how the color like lays over grayscales. All the values are already primed. And then since that's done, I can go through with my white colored pencil and do a few of our little highlights and shadows. I want it to look a little more like charred and contrast on the top of the glass, so I'm adding in a darker shadow there. So now we're going to start really creating this vignette of coldness, that the light is the warm thing, so we need to make everything else feel cold. So I've got my medium cold gray marker, and I'm just really quickly shading in this whole vignette. Now I'm taking a medium gray, I think it's my like number 6 out of 10, and doing some line work and graining on the wood. I'm letting it come through pretty dark still, even where we're going to have the light showing, because the light wouldn't maybe be able to get into the crevices of all of the grain work, so I'm not kind of fading it out in those areas. But it will sort of fade into, you know, oblivion. It'll get less clear in the shadowed areas. Going back through with my yellow and really widening up and adding more texture to our glow area. So this is a darker blue I'm going to use to just add some deeper blue values to our areas. Do final round of highlights of stuff that would catch just along the lantern itself. Because I'm kind of letting the stuff that I worked on the boards dry and soak in, since I'm doing, I want some texture on that because of the wood grain, so I don't want it to get too blurry. So letting it dry in between passes is kind of helpful. I mean, it dries very quickly, but. So a few more grain lines, this time with a darker gray. Now my darkest cold gray, I'm going back in and bumping up my level on the shadow so that the cast shadow becomes as dark as the line in between the boards. So you need your value range to just be really really specific, really high contrast. You need to kind of think about how that light's going to bounce, how that's going to go there. And if everything else is getting darker, we're continually pushing the light of the lantern to be brighter. And we're making sure all tension goes there, right? So this is a taupey kind of cool toned brown color that we're using to tone the wood. Now that we've got this grayscale has essentially built all of our value levels up, we can go through and start toning it to be a little bit more colorful. And it makes for a nice transitional color from the golden light into the color of the board. This is my darkest cool gray that I'm using to really offset that background, and then the middle gray to kind of soften the edge of it, blur it in. Remembering to walk it behind where the lantern is too, so that my balance doesn't get really weird. Letting those sort of sit for a minute and make sure that they're soaked in well. A few more touches to brighten our contrast level of where the light would be hitting on the lantern itself. And then a few warmer areas to really push that vignette feeling that it's casting this circular glow. Another pass with the taupe to deepen it as it fades into the cool gray and to add some variation into the line work. of the grains as they run through the golden area. So you can kind of see the more and more you work at it, the more you can start to use intuition to darken areas and bring that really into focus. So in this study, everything that's touched by light has to be kind of a warm tone, and everything that isn't becomes this like cool tone. So to help push that even further, I'm taking this deep kind of bright royal blue and using it in a few areas to push both the blue of the lantern that we glazed in over the grayscale, and also to use it to deepen the effect of that contrast between cold and hot that we were using in the lighting. So I'm using the same color both on the lantern and in the background because it's the coldest marker that I've got. So it adds vibrancy where the lantern is, but where it goes over all of those different grays and browns and things that are layered, it's just going to add depth to that shadow. It's not going to look blue necessarily, but it will certainly tone it a bit cooler. So you can see how just like there's so many different layers built up there that it's not coming through as a bright blue. All of those under layers, especially the grays that we've layered in, always will affect the colors you put on top of them. Markers are not really opaque. They're more like working in kind of a watercolor world, usually. So they're all kind of sitting together and mixing and becoming more mixed tones instead of bright tones. That's one of the things I like about using the grayscales as a first pass, because they do tone all your colors and give you some really interesting subtle lights and shadows that otherwise we might have a really bright, really vibrant effect here. So that is our lantern. You can see he's got a pretty good sense of glow there. I hope that helps.